The next evolution that we're going to be working through is going to be now hand transitions and unilateral work. So starting off with one-arm swings, maintaining that control. So remember how we were breaking it down? Even with the ballistic work, we want to maintain control before we go into explosive rotation. So in this case, we're going to do one-arm swings. We're going to stick to one side before we alternate. Then we'll practice alternating just so you can see how that works. But with the one-arm swing, what's going to be even more predominant here is that focus on that lat tension, because when we're doing the two-hand swings, we're keeping the tension just by keeping that extension throughout the thoracic spine, through the mid-back. Now, once we have one arm, there's much more likelihood that we're going to overly reach, and thus take the stress off the shoulder. So what we do want to do is keep that tension on the lat. So the same way when we did the mobility in the beginning, where we were in that extended position, and then we just pulled the shoulders back and then brought the shoulders down. That's going to keep the shoulders safe, because that lat is going to connect the shoulder to the arm, and it's going to really secure the joint. So that's going to make us much, much more likely to stay safe once we start one arm swinging and flowing. And even when we get into different multi-directional patterns, we're always going to maintain this connection regardless of what direction I'm in. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start from the ground, just as we did with the two-hand swing, and we're just going to do some one-arm swings, but we're going to avoid rotation through the trunk. We're going to keep everything nice and linear. So as we swing, feet are planted, shoulders are engaged, arm is tucked. I'm going to hike and swing. So notice how I'm not extending the arm. I'm keeping that arm tucked to the body. On the way down, I'm mirroring the arm. My shoulder is dropped, my lat is engaged, and I'm keeping everything square. So nothing changes from when I'm doing two hands, except that now more of that load is going to be on my external obliques, because it's forcing me to stay square rather than rotating. And I'm definitely going to feel a lot more in my glutes to keep that connection and to keep that tension. So once I've mastered that, I feel comfortable with the one-arm swing, I'm going to incorporate then an alternating swing. So with the alternating swing now, again, it's going back to what we were talking about with the breath, being able to marry fluidity and tension. You cannot stay so tense that on that swing, you're not going to be able to transition easily. So there has to be that blend where you can loosen up for just a second, and it's a millisecond, and that's where flow is. That's where juggling, that's where being able to explode, that's where it lies, in that second of relaxation. So you're just tense enough to not hurt yourself, but relaxed enough that you can change hand positions. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch. We're going to do two swings on one arm, and on the third one, we're going to switch on the way up. So there's a moment of weightlessness, and this is very, very important, especially as we get into cleans and snatches and flows. There's a moment of weightlessness. That's where we're going to play with. Remember that same fluidity where right between the tension, that's where we're going to make any kind of transitions. So as we come up, we're going to do two swings, 1, 2, and on the third one, on the way up, I'm switching hands. 1, 2, same thing, on the way up. So notice how I'm switching hand over, up and over. That allows me for a little bit easier of a transition, but you're more than welcome to just, on the third swing, switch hands and keep the handle parallel to the ground. So whatever feels comfortable for you. I prefer that rotation, but in that rotation, I'm not disengaging my shoulder. I'm still keeping that tension. So even if I turn it over and there's that rotation, I'm still keeping that connection. I don't want to lose that. So these are very subtle differences that seem fairly obvious if you've ever done kettlebells. And even if you haven't, you see like, okay, there's a flip. But it shows you the nuances in this and how the devil's in the details with every one of these movements to keep you safe, to keep you secure, and ultimately to help you progress safely while building resiliency in whatever, position we're working on. So let's do that one more time. So now we're just going to go right into alternating, and then we'll start to add in some rotation. So we'll start from the ground. Now switching on the way up. If we wait too long, just do another rep and then switch. So what we don't want to do is try to catch a bad rep. Okay? Anytime you're chasing after a bad rep, just as in life, don't chase after things. You want to keep everything nice and tight and close to you. As soon as you start to chase things, as soon as you start to reach out from the ground up, you lose that connection. You increase the likelihood that you start to injure or you tweak something on your lower back, your mid back, your shoulders, your neck. Too many variables, not worth it to chase after one bad rep. So this is why if you're very new to kettlebells, either use something very light where you can control, or do it in a place where if you drop the bell, it is not going to harm anything, including the kettlebell. All right, so let's do it one more time. Swing and switch with a swing, back and forth. So I'm staying square. Notice how my upper body, my trunk is staying fairly square. And down. So another thing you'll notice is when I'm swinging, I'm only performing the hinge and the snap. I'm not going to perform a hinge and a scoop. So I'm trying to keep my knees as if there was a bar through my knees. As I come down, I can straighten and hinge slightly, but I cannot shift away from this bar. So as I move back and forth, I'm not going to dip underneath it. All right, that's a great way to add efficiency where I can keep going. I want to add effectiveness. I want to add more tension, more output on the musculature that I'm working rather than trying to get more reps. Okay, there's a time and place for things, but in the case of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish, we don't want to do that. All right, so now that I've gone through the alternating swings, one-arm swings, now we're going to add in some rotation. So as you do this, you're going to find that it actually feels more comfortable because naturally, as you start with one hand, as you come down, your body's naturally going to want to open up. And that's fine. We want that, but we want to be able to control it before we just go right into it. This is where people injure themselves because they see something cool, they see something fancy on Instagram, and then they're like, I want to do that, when they're not perfectly ready for it. So now, we'll practice without any weight first. As I come down, so let's imagine the bell is in my left hand, I'm in the top of the swing. As I come down, I'm going to open up and get a nice little stretch on one side. I'm not leaning or twisting, I'm staying square, but now I'm adding that rotation. So as I drive up, pop, that opposite glute, that contralateral glute to the arm that's holding the bell, is getting that much more activated at the top of this position. So think about the implications of that for an athletic stance. If I'm swinging, if I'm punching, if I'm kicking, what am I doing? I'm not coming from a bilateral stance and going, bah! I'm not going to drive with 2 feet on the ground. I'm going to be in that unilateral or rotational pivoting stance. So from here, even though I'm in that bilateral stance, as I come up, I want to focus on adding that rotation, adding that pop from that opposite glute, and that's going to allow me to build rotational power without excessive torque on the spine. And that's what I'm trying to do with this, is minimize the risk and increase the output, increase the reward that we can potentially get. So as we come down again, notice, without any weight, so much easier without any weight. So loaded on one arm, I'm going to come down, and as I come back, notice the leg positions. The same thing we've been doing, we practice just with those hip mobility drills. So why do you think, if we can't do this without weight, why would we do this loaded, especially in that hinged position? So once we get in this position right here, that back leg is straight, that front leg is bent. Notice my upper body, my torso is still going to stay straight. It's still going to be in line, my arm is still going to be in line with my spine. It's still going to keep myself nice and straight, so I'm not going to rotate, so I'm not ultimately flexing and rotating, putting a lot of pressure on the spine. I'm rotating, but still keeping that spinal extension so that I can stay at least neutral, if not extended, to keep myself really secure. So now as I come down, the next thing I want you to think about is neck position. So if that from the root of my spine, from my pelvis all the way to the crown of my head is one straight line, the only thing that's going to slightly rotate is my chest and then my head. So as I look down, I'm not going to be able to look in the same spot. I'm going to have to move with it. I don't want to look in the same spot and thus put a lot of pressure on the cervical spine. So I want to move with it and then drive. Move with it and then drive. So I want you to practice this. With your left hand, you're going to hike the bell. With your right hand, you're going to keep it in line with your chin. And as you come back, I want you to feel that position. As you come back, you're making sure you're following along. You're not turning or tilting your head. And as you drive forward, that right glute fires a little bit harder. So I think just 10 to 20% more output on that side versus the other side, because both hips are ultimately going to be in that pelvic tilt, in that hip extension. But because you're just further away by a few inches than your other hip, because of this position right here, as we drive forward, we really want to accentuate that glute speed, that glute drive that's leading the way. All right, so now, enough talk. Let's do it with some actual freaking weight. We'll start with the left hand. We're only going to do swings with the left hand. We're not going to switch back and forth, and we're going to stay in that bilateral position. So feet planted parallel to each other, both staying on the ground. So as I come back now, I'm going to hike. I'm going to do 2 swings. On the third swing, I'm going to open up. And again, going back to what we talked about with the chest-supported rotation, I'm going to earn the rotation, and I'm going to only go rotate as much as this open hip will allow. If it's very subtle, the rotation is subtle. If it's a little bit more accentuated, the rotation happens a little bit further. So from right here, I'm going to do 2 swings. Uno, dos. And on the last one, I'm going to open up. So notice how when I open up, this back leg is going to get a little bit straighter. That front leg is going to bend, or that left leg is going to bend. And I'm driving that opposite glute a little bit more powerfully than the other side. Let's do the other side so you can see. 1, 2, and now open up. So I'm opening up just enough. And it is a powerful way to add rotation into yourself and to your client's training without wear and tear of that full rotation and that full position on, or that full focus and torque on the spine. So it's just opening up everything, and it's really making it for very useful rotational power that you're really creating from the ground up. So as it comes down, you're focusing on your rooting, your connection to the ground. As you drive forward, driving that leg a little bit harder, driving that glute a little bit harder, that then will build explosive rotational power. All right, so once we've gone into that, now we're going to play around with some alternating rotational swings. So as I come up, now this is going to get a little tricky. It's going to require a little bit more coordination, and this is, again, a great way to progress into flows and juggling, but still staying safer and in the confines of one particular movement, so rather than extending beyond that. So let's go into alternating swings with rotation, and every time we catch, we're going to rotate a little bit more, until we find that end range. So we'll start very subtle, and then we'll add a little more depth to that movement as we continue. So let's do 1 swing each arm, and now we'll add the rotation. Very subtle at first, a little bit more, until we've reached that end point, and we cannot rotate anymore safely without internally rotating or adducting that leg, bringing that knee in. We want to still keep that parallel to each other. And what you'll find with this movement, even keeping everything else the same, is that it will feel a little looser on the back. You'll feel a little less tension on the back and a little bit more power output coming from the glutes and from the hamstrings. And what I like about this, again, is it feels more natural. Because it is more natural, it mimics real life rotation a little bit more naturally than full-on rotational work. So once we've mastered that progression, the next variable that we can start to incorporate in this rotation is unilateral work. So what we're going to do is we're just going to change foot positions. So again, we're not focused on heavier and heavier, heavier. How can we increase the output? How can we increase the potential for energy output with this movement without having to only increase weight? So now we can start to play around with foot position. So I'll just show you a couple variations, and then you can take it from there. But all we're going to do is we're going to focus all the pressure on one side. This other foot, you're going to have just slightly pressure. So I'm going to think about 50% of the pressure is going to be on this foot. Full pressure on my left foot, 50% on my right foot. Only going to start with one arm. So now, from here, as I do this staggered stance swing, I'm going to really maintain the same form I've been doing. I'm going to maintain the same position, the same transitions I've been working with, but all we're changing is this one variable. So we'll go right into it. And now adding that rotation with that swing, and it makes it for a very powerful leg driver. I'm going to switch feet. So now I'm focusing just on that opposite foot. So this is building a lot of unilateral strength without creating too much of an imbalance that I feel out of sorts, or I feel insecure with that position. So this is another example of how we can increase the progressions without increasing the weight. So we'll try it again, adding that rotation, and now we can go back and forth, changing foot positions, changing the width of the foot positions, going back to square, going back to rotation. So you see how you can have so much variation with just one movement, with just adding or taking away a little bit of stability, adding a little bit of rotation. It makes it so much more useful, so much more powerful, and thus so much more really fun, because then you can have so many variations of the same movement, so you don't just do the same thing over and over and over until you feel like, I don't want to freaking swing a kettlebell anymore. That's fine. You don't have to. You can do these variations where you're still getting the benefit of the movement pattern, but you're not taking away from it.